Welcome back, everyone. Sheepdog Smokey here. Happy Wednesday. I hope you're having a great week so far. Before we get in, as always, please remember to like the video, share so we widen the conversation, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you are aware of all content as it posts. We left off last time with basically the end of that odd period after you achieve a massive goal and then have to figure out how you're going to move forward after that success. The colonists had been slowly growing more and more and more upset with Britain and how they were being ruled until the revolution was inevitable. Once that was won, we became our own country, there was going to be a period where people have to ask, how do we move forward? What do we do now? How do we solve all these problems? By the end of Washington's second term, 1796, that is where you really start seeing the country has gotten to a point where it kind of becomes business as usual. Congress had been created, the Constitution had been ratified to do that. We had the bicameral houses, the judiciary, the legislative, and we had the executive branch, and we had the controls put in place by the Constitution. So by the time we get to the early 1800s, it really has become just business as usual every day for the country. Now, we are at this point barely 30 years, 35 years removed from, not even that, well, barely 30, 35 years from the Revolution, where France had decided we're going to fight with the colonists, not for any great love for the colonists, but out of animosity toward the British, and really kind of wanting to blacken the British eye. Then the French Revolution happened, and as we were a major trading partner with Britain, but also France had helped us in the war, we stayed out of it. By this point then, we had France beginning to attack U.S. merchant ships. The U.S. government sent a delegation to France to basically work out a way to make them stop, and the French foreign minister would not even meet with our ambassador in this case. He sent 3 agents who basically demanded a bribe. Quite literally, you will pay us to not kill you. Mafia protection money, if you will. To the point where it wouldn't work. And our ambassador wouldn't even use the 3 agents' names. They were called agents X, Y, and Z. It's the XYZ affair. Because of this, the U.S. Navy expanded greatly. Really, the birth of the U.S. Navy was due to the XYZ affair, where we needed to be able to protect our own interests on the open water. Not long after that, of course, we have a landmark case, Marbury versus Madison. Marbury believed he was owed a commission, and it made it to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court actually said, we think you deserve a commission too, but that's not our place. They ruled for Madison. It set the precedent for judicial review. And it also set a precedent of the Supreme Court is not there to say, here's what we think, you're going to do as we say. They looked at the law, and they looked at the case, and realized there was no case. Marbury did not have a leg to stand on in demanding a commission. They looked at his record and said that they agreed he should have been commissioned, but by the rules and laws laid out, he couldn't force it. During this time, we also had the famous duel between Burr and Hamilton, which Burr won. Hamilton had tried to say he was against dueling, and that he would not even aim at his opponent when doing so, and he died very shortly after that, having been shot. What we're getting to, though, is the real meat of this era, which was westward expansion. It was always going to happen. The colonists knew that their little slice of this continent would not sustain them forever. We had already had treaties that expanded into the Northwest where now we had territories until they had 60,000 residents and could apply for statehood. So the push west was always coming. In 1812, we had Tecumseh that basically, he said, the chiefs who signed the treaties did not speak for all tribes. It was the beginning of animosity and violence. And parts of the War of 1812 spurred off of this, because Tecumseh had gone to the Creek tribe to basically get them to side with him, with the Shawnee people. While he was there, William Henry Harrison attacked at Tippecanoe and defeated the Shawnee tribe, basically setting off violence between the Shawnee and the Creek and the U.S. The British, of course, saw this and began antagonizing the natives to really kind of split the forces. The British were still very upset that they had lost a cash cow in the colonies and saw this as a way to punish and possibly bring the colonies back by defeating them in a war and forcing submission. What they didn't realize was the spirit of the colonies still prevailed. We were our own country, but we were still those same people who had been ruled by a tyrant. And here was that same nation setting people against us, fomenting hate and violence, and really helping to start a war. Now, of course, in the very far north, the British still held Canada. It's still very much ruled by the British. So we had a lot of British military that could easily get into Canada and move around right on the border. The British controlled Lake Erie. And we knew that we had to take away their control of certain areas and solidify our own hold on certain parts of land, certain parcels of land and sea. It was Oliver Perry that attacked in Lake Erie, and even after his ship was destroyed, he kept fighting. The British saw this as, well, his ship's gone, they can't fight, and the spirit, that will to continue fighting, eventually saw the British surrender in September of 1813. In October of 1813, William Henry Harrison and the Battle of the Thames. He defeated the Great British and the Indians, killing Tecumseh, and of course also ending the Creek Alliance. This is very much how a lot of the war would go for many years. We see war now as nation versus nation, and you have very set parameters to the war. If we look at the hostilities in the Middle East, this has become very much our point in history that the British experienced in the American Revolution, and they experienced it again in the War of 1812. Their mindset on war was, we line up both sides, whoever's still standing wins. Well, with the Middle East, we're no longer fighting an army of one nation. This isn't like World War I, World War II, Korea, or even Vietnam, although Vietnam was a move toward not knowing who your enemy was. Now we very much have our military and our allies' militaries fighting against people who blend into the surrounding population. We don't know what is going to happen or when. We had the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in March of 1814. Andrew Jackson led that, defeated the Creeks, and we had the Treaty of Fort Jackson where they lost some land. Battle of Bladensburg in 1814, it was a defeat for the U.S., allowing the British to sail into Chesapeake Bay. This is where the Capitol and the White House were sacked and burned. This is also when Francis Scott Key penned the Star-Spangled Banner. He was a prisoner on a British ship, and the events of that led him to pen his famous poem, which would become our national anthem. We then get to the Battle of New Orleans and Battle of Lake Champlain, where the U.S. would not surrender. Eventually, the British just retreated, but it is very much a continuation of what I spoke of with military tactics and the Revolutionary War. The British were still using the set tactics of their army marching in as one unit, while the U.S. were still using the tactics born of the American Revolution of targeting officers, guerrilla tactics where you would be attacked and flanked, not just facing one army across the field. In 1815, Andrew Jackson had defeated the British there because of that style of war. Oddly enough, that really was the end of the war, but we had the Hartford Convention. These are people who didn't know the war was over. They actually went to Congress and they had their declaration arguing against a continuing war. It greatly embarrassed them and the Federalists due to the war already being over. We had the Treaty of Ghent, that of course was already signed, and that was brought out to show them, wait, the war you're saying needs to stop has already stopped. It left a lot unresolved. It really just ended hostilities between the U.S. and Great Britain. And, I mean, I don't know, it really kind of seemed that it was a move toward diplomacy. Basically saying, we're going to stop fighting. We're not friends. We're not done with this. But we're not going to send people to fight in military battles over it anymore. We're just going to resolve our issues a different way. It would take years upon years before we get to a point where we truly were no longer antagonistic toward each other. The move after this is really where we see industrialism begin in its infancy. The Americans of this time had been living a colonial life, very agrarian, very much. You would have cobblers and hatters and tailors living over their stores, grocers living above their store. Farmers would bring their crops in daily to sell. And we were starting to realize this is not going to sustain a nation. Granted, yes, even today we have communities that still live very much like this. Go look at the Amish in Ohio, where very, very little modern anything about them. And they still live very well. They can raise a barn in no time. They handle all their own crops. And they live very good, very quiet lives. But it won't sustain a nation. And this is where we begin to see that push, the growth of innovation, where we start to see people begin dreaming. Now, granted, Eli Whitney wouldn't bring about the cotton gin for a long time, but it was this era where we realized, okay, we're still fighting our enemies on this, but we're not able to sustain the country as well as we should be able to, especially if we're going to be involved in wars regularly. So they needed a way to farm more efficiently, to have their cities run more efficiently, and so on and so forth. And it was this small spark right here that would eventually lead to people saying, I think I can do this in a better way and not have to basically wear out a city to accomplish one task. Now, of course, we know the Industrial Revolution doesn't hit for a long time after this, but you can see how seeds are planted right here. People realizing, for example, military tactics. We realized in the Revolution, realized again in the War of 1812, the set-piece battles where it's two armies across a field firing until one side is all dead, with the officers in the back sitting, smoking their pipes, waiting to see who will have to surrender. The same would begin to be considered and thought of for agriculture and other things, where we would lead over 100 years later to Henry Ford and his assembly line. It's the seeds that are planted that would ultimately lead to this revolution happening decades and decades later. That is really all there is for this period. It was really just realizing that winning the revolution didn't just end all of the bad stuff and put us on a happy and peaceful path. We would have to defend our sovereignty, and we've had to several times. And we would have to realize that alliances are not always what they look like. Many of the lessons learned. But it was these lessons that led us to the country we are today. Thank you for watching again today. We're going to keep moving through history. We are going to be more along the lines of these short little videos talking about one incident here and there for several weeks, really. The only real times we're going to have anything big will be the Industrial Revolution, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Civil Rights Movement. Those big items have a lot about them, but there's a lot more to American history than that. And that's really what I hope to bring to my videos. As always, let me know what you think. Please be civil, though. As we are adults, we can discuss, dissent, and debate civilly without devolving into toddlers hurling insults and flinging food across the table. Please do so. As always, please like and share the video to widen the conversation. Make sure you're subscribed and turned on notifications so you know about all new content as it posts. Until next time, have a wonderful day.